Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something that I think is really relevant to almost everybody, and that is the topic of friendship. We've all heard about the loneliness epidemic sweeping America. In fact, even the Surgeon General is using that term these days. But research is painting this really stark picture of rising social isolation. But here's the thing. It's not as simple as just not having any friends at all. Today, we're exploring what I think is a really fascinating paradox, and that is that Americans do have friends. They just really struggle to actually see them. And to help unpack all of this, we're going to be looking at a fascinating article from The Atlantic, as well as pulling in some other research, and hopefully together we'll find some actionable insights from all of this.
Yeah, and you know what's really intriguing is that on the surface, the data doesn't really scream crisis. The average American reports having 4 or 5 friends, and less than 4% actually say that they have none. And these numbers really just echo findings from, past studies. Yet it seems like they're concealing this deeper longing.
I think you're right. And the article really calls it out. They use this word longingness. You might have this decent number of friends in your life.
Yeah.
But you still yearn for more closeness or those shared experiences. And I'm curious, for our listeners out there, can you relate to that feeling at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people can. And, the numbers sort of back this up. Americans are now spending less than 3 hours per week with friends, which is down sharply from over 6 hours a decade ago. And this is sort of, naturally leading to this rise in time spent alone.
Yeah, and it's almost comical in a way. It's like joining all of these online mom groups, but they never actually meet up in person.
Yeah.
And the article even had this anecdote about that, which I thought was so relatable. But all joking aside, it really begs the question, why is this happening?
Well, one major culprit is this shrinking pool of free time that we all seem to have. Studies are showing that older millennials who are, often juggling work and young children, they have 16 fewer leisure minutes each day compared to just 10 years ago. Think about that. Almost an hour and a half less free time per week. And, this decline in leisure time, it wasn't just measured by surveys. It was calculated by tracking how people actually spend their time. So it's very much reflecting the reality of our increasingly busy lives.
Yeah. And I think that's what really resonates with people. It's like time is this precious resource that's just constantly being gobbled up by work, childcare, errands. The list just never ends.
Exactly. And that leads us to, I think, the second hurdle here, which is the sheer effort of scheduling. If you think back a few decades, unions, clubs, religious groups, all of these things, they provided these built-in structures for socializing. You didn't need to constantly plan and coordinate everything with everybody.
It was very effortless in a way. You knew, when and where to meet. You had those common interests with all the other members. And it really took the pressure off of individuals having to be the social organizers all the time.
Yeah, exactly. These structures, regularized contact, as the research puts it. It wasn't a constant burden on each person's limited free time. But today, it's such a different story. We have all these friendship apps and countless self-help books, and they're all promising to help us connect. But the irony is, they still leave the responsibility of initiating and maintaining contact squarely on our shoulders.
It's so true. It's like we've traded those organic community structures for this system where we're constantly micromanaging every single relationship in our lives.
And this individualized approach, it leads to a fascinating observation that was made by author Anna Goldfarb in her book, Modern Friendship. She points out that in a lot of modern friendships, each friend only shares a common history with you, the listener, not necessarily with each other.
Oh, that's such a good point. Think about it, everybody listening. Visualize your own friend groups for a second. How many separate brunches or coffee dates would it take for you to see all of them? It's almost as if we're juggling all these separate relationships instead of nurturing this interconnected network.
That's a great way to put it. And unfortunately, not everyone has that same juggling ability. Socioeconomic factors, I think, play a really significant role here. People with more resources, whether that's time, money, flexible schedules, they have a distinct advantage when it comes to nurturing these friendships.
Yeah, and there's compelling research that backs that up. For instance, college-educated Americans, they're much more likely to host gatherings and have access to what sociologists call third places. These are, your cafes, libraries, parks, community centers, all these places where people naturally encounter one another.
And, these third places, they offer these really casual, low-stakes opportunities for connection, often without the need for any sort of, elaborate planning or significant expense. But unfortunately, access to these spaces, both geographically and financially, is not equal.
So what can we do If we're facing this perfect storm of, limited time, increased effort, and all these societal barriers, is there any hope for fostering these really meaningful friendships?
Well, the situation might seem daunting, but I think there are these practical steps that we can take. Goldfarb, for example, advocates for what she calls ratcheting down expectations. Instead of striving for these elusive grand gestures, prioritize those small, meaningful interactions.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Sure, imagine you have a friend who just became a parent. Instead of proposing a night out at a bar across town, which might feel really overwhelming for them right now, offer 20 minutes of conversation at their place, maybe bring over some fresh fruit. It's about adapting to their reality and offering support in a way that feels manageable for both of you.
I love that idea. It really shifts the focus, from these elaborate events
Hmm.
to those smaller, more attainable acts of connection.
And that shift in mindset is crucial. We need to recognize that those grand gestures aren't always feasible, but small acts of connection can be just as powerful, if not more so.
It makes me wonder, can we as individuals and as a society find ways to reintegrate those effortless structures
Yeah.
that, as the research puts it, regularize contact? Maybe those structures are the missing piece in this whole puzzle of modern friendship.
That's a fantastic question, and one that deserves very careful consideration. Perhaps there are lessons to be learned from those older models of community that we can adapt to our modern lives.
Yeah, it's a really thought-provoking challenge, isn't it? How do we recreate those organic connections in an age where, everything just feels so scheduled and demanding?
Right, and it makes me think about those older community structures that we were just talking about. There was just this, built-in sense of shared values and expectations. You just knew what to expect from others, and you knew what was expected of you. That shared understanding is so key. It really reduced the cognitive burden of having to navigate all of those relationships. Think of it like this set of unspoken rules that everybody just implicitly understood. And it really freed up so much mental space to actually enjoy those connections.
Right. It's like having the social script already in place, so you're not constantly having to negotiate the terms of the interaction every single time.
Mm.
And I think that inherent familiarity, it must have fostered such a strong sense of belonging, the sense of community that it seems like we're really lacking today.
And you're right, that sense of belonging is so vital. It can be such a powerful antidote to the isolation and uncertainty of modern life. And it really highlights the fact that, solutions to this loneliness epidemic, they can't solely rely on individual effort. We need to think bigger. We need to consider these societal structures that actively support and encourage connection.
I think so too. We need to create these environments where those serendipitous encounters can flourish, where friendships can grow organically,
Mm.
not just through, meticulously planned events.
Exactly. It requires this shift in our collective mindset. Imagine a world where urban planning actually prioritized community spaces and events. Imagine workplaces embracing, flexible arrangements that actually allowed people to carve out time for social interaction.
It is exciting to think about a society that prioritizes connection as much as productivity. But, in the meantime, what steps can we take, on an individual level while we're working towards those larger societal shifts?
Well, one powerful approach is to just be more intentional about reaching out to our friends, even in these seemingly insignificant ways. Send a quick text message, share an article they might find interesting, offer to help with a chore.
Yeah, I think those small gestures can make such a world of difference. It's about weaving those little acts of care and consideration into the fabric of our daily lives.
And recognizing that, even amidst all of our busy schedules, we all crave that feeling of belonging, of being seen and heard by the people who matter to us. And that's a really fundamental human need that transcends, age, background, socioeconomic status.
We might feel isolated at times, but we're not alone in this experience. We all share this really deep-seated desire for connection.
Absolutely. And that shared desire can be such a powerful catalyst for change. By acknowledging the universality of this need, we can begin to dismantle the stigma surrounding loneliness and start creating a world where meaningful connections are nurtured and celebrated.
It's inspiring to think that, even small changes in our individual behaviors and mindsets can contribute to this larger cultural shift.
Yeah.
A shift towards a world where friendships are not just valued, but they're actively fostered.
And that shift in turn can have this ripple effect on our collective well-being. When we feel connected, supported, seen, we're just better equipped to face the challenges of life and contribute to this more compassionate and resilient society.
So where do we go from here? We've explored this paradox of having friends, yet feeling lonely. We've uncovered the time crunch and the scheduling burden. And we've talked about, the importance of realistic expectations and intentional acts of connection. What are some, key takeaways for our listeners as they navigate the, often complex world of modern friendship?
It really boils down to, I think, a few key principles. First, recognize that this loneliness epidemic, it's a shared experience. It's not a sign of personal failing. There are so many people out there struggling with this. And acknowledging that can be just immensely freeing.
Yeah. It's like, realizing you're not the only one who feels lost in a crowded room. And I think there is this, sense of solidarity in that shared experience.
Absolutely. And second, remember that connection doesn't always require those grand gestures. It's often the small, consistent acts of care that really nourish a friendship. A quick phone call, a thoughtful text, a simple offer to help. All of these things can go such a long way.
It's about weaving those small acts of kindness into, the fabric of our daily routine.
Exactly. And third, be mindful of the systemic factors at play. Advocate for changes in our communities and workplaces that actually prioritize connection. Push for urban planning that fosters those third places, support businesses that create community spaces, encourage those flexible work arrangements that allow for social interaction.
Those are all really tangible actions that we can take to create a more connection-friendly society.
And while we work towards, those larger systemic changes, remember the power of individual action. Choose to prioritize friendships even amidst all the busyness of life. Make time for those coffee dates, those phone calls, those shared moments, however small they may seem.
Because those seemingly insignificant moments, they add up to create a richer, more meaningful life.
Precisely. And who knows, maybe those small acts of connection will inspire others to do the same and create this ripple effect of kindness and connection that spreads throughout our communities.
I love that. That's a really beautiful thought to end on. Just a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of those around us. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the complexities of modern friendship. We hope this has, sparked some reflection, inspired some action, and maybe even encouraged you to reach out to a friend you haven't spoken to in a while. Until next time,